Buenas tardes. Quiero darles a todos la bienvenida a la conferencia del profesor Paul Milgrom, Premio Nóbel de Economía del 2020. Dear Paul, thank you very much for coming and being here in Sevilla in a very special academic year for all of us. We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of our faculty of economy, and your presence here is a high honor for all of us. Thank you very much for coming. Le doy la palabra en primer lugar al señor decano de la Facultad, don Antonio Navarro García.
Rector magnífico de la Universidad de Sevilla, querido Miguel Ángel, profesor Milgrom, vicedecanos, otras autoridades presentes en la sala, profesores, estudiantes. Como saben, estamos celebrando nuestro 50 aniversario y yo creo que hoy es un día muy especial para esta facultad y para la Universidad de Sevilla. Pues contar con un premio Nóbel, el Premio Nóbel 2020 de Economía, el profesor Paul Milgrom, pues para nosotros es un verdadero honor y un auténtico orgullo. Se podrían destacar muchas cosas del profesor Milgrom. El vicedecano Paco Liñán hará una semblanza del profesor Milgrom, pero yo quiero destacar su grandeza como persona, porque ha sido un contacto con él en su correo personal, nos ha contestado siempre en todo momento y rápidamente, y desde un primer momento ha querido estar en este 50 aniversario de la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas y Empresariales de la Universidad de Sevilla. Así que nuestro máximo agradecimiento muy sincero, y desde luego esperemos que disfruten de esta conferencia que tenemos en el día de hoy. Muchas gracias, rector.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, querido decano. A continuación tiene la palabra don Francisco Liñán, alcalde, vicedecano de Investigación, Transferencia y Emprendimiento de la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas y Empresariales, que realizará la semblanza del profesor Paul Robert Milgrom.
Muchas gracias, señor rector, señor decano. Muchas gracias a todos los presentes por su asistencia. Con su permiso, voy a realizar la presentación de nuestro invitado en inglés, por deferencia hacia él. Professor Paul Robert Milgrom, it is a great pleasure for us to have you here today to help us celebrate the 50th anniversary of this center, the Faculty of Economics and Business Sciences. I was just explaining that I will introduce you to the audience in English so that you can spot any possible errors and omissions and correct me. In order to prepare this brief introduction, I have been very lucky, since Professor Milgrom has published in his Stanford University webpage a very detailed biography that I would recommend anyone in the audience to read. Rather than narrating all his positions and achievements, I would rather focus on some personal notes. Many of you will know that Professor Milgrom holds a degree in mathematics from the University of Michigan, which led him to work for the private sector. And after some time, though, he returned to university to earn a master's degree in statistics and a PhD in business from Stanford University. First, I would stress a very interesting coincidence in meeting with some very talented researchers at that time, and especially the ability of Professor Milgrom to establish and maintain long-lasting academic and personal relationships with them. His PhD was supervised by Professor Robert Wilson, who became a friend. Their academic work together has been so fruitful that they have eventually been jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. At that time in Stanford, he also met Ben Holmstrom, who became a lifelong friend, a prolific co-author, and a Nobel laureate himself in 2016. Professor Milgrom's first academic job was at Northwestern University starting in 1979. There, he worked with Professor Meyerson, another Nobel to be. After a few years, he moved to Yale University. In both instances, he managed to attract his friend and colleague Ben Holmstrom with him. Then, eventually, in 1987, he accepted an offer from Stanford, where he has remained ever since. In 1994, Professors Wilson and Milgrom developed a simultaneous multiple round auction for the Federal Communications Commission in order to allocate a large number of licenses for wireless communications covering different areas and bandwidth. Its design and satisfactory performance was recognized as one of the main contributions leading to the Nobel Prize Award. As a second note, I would stress his generous and altruistic character. In this sense, he is especially proud of his accomplishment advising students. In 2017, he received the Dean's Award for Distinguished Teaching at the Stanford School of Humanities and Sciences. Even if he continues to do research, he now recognizes devoting more time and effort to training students. Additionally, Professor Milgrom was especially aware of sexist behavior in academia through some of his daughter's experiences during university. For this reason, he decided to set up an initiative to train women economists at Stanford. As a funny circumstance about the Nobel Award, let me tell you that Professor Milgrom may be the only Nobel laureate having attended a ceremony, which was not his, but who has not attended his own award ceremony. In 1996, he was called to attend and praise the award winner, Professor Vickrey, who died before the ceremony. In 2020, in turn, when he won the prize, there was no in-person ceremony due to the COVID pandemic. So to conclude, let me say, as his wife Eva puts it, that the key for his success has been working hard, working harder, and never giving up. Thus, all through his life, Paul dared to take advantage of opportunity when it came along. Therefore, we can only be grateful for all your excellent work. Thank you very much.
If you like, you can go there. Okay, so I have the honor to give the floor to Professor Paul Robert Milgrom, Nobel Prize in Economy 2020, who is going to give the lecture entitled Auctions to Allocate Public Resources. Dear Professor, you have the floor.
We on now? Oh, that's better. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for your generous introduction. Great pleasure to see you all. What I want to talk to you about today is auctions and market design. So one of the things that I did early in my career, well, not so early, after working on the design of auctions for the Federal Communications Commission, I was visiting at Harvard with Professor Al Roth, where we introduced the first course together on what we call market design, bringing together matching market design and auction market design, which have more in common than you might think. And I want to talk to you today about a whole series of applications that are going on, some of which have been done and some of which are still going on. We're changing the rules by which markets work in order to make them work better. So that's my topic for today. And I guess the disadvantage of being here is I have to look backwards, but it should be all right. Just by way of introduction, my friend Asun over here has arranged for me a collection of some of the big auctions that have happened in Spain in the last year or a little longer than a year. There were two 5G spectrum auctions in Spain in 2021, and upon reviewing them, they appear not to have been very competitive. Same design, and I'll tell you more about this later, the same design which led to a lot of competition in the United States and in Canada led to very little competition in Spain. And there are reasons why design has to respond to context. You have to pay attention to what the particular issues are if you want to arrange a competitive auction design. There have been a couple of green energy capacity auctions that are designed to promote the development of green energy, sovereign debt auctions, infrastructure for trains, roads, ports, airports in 2020, auctions too. So auctions have played an important role in procurement in Spain. In the European emissions trading, CO2 auctions, where their attempt is to reduce CO2 emissions by 40% relative to 1990 by 2030. So auctions are being used a lot, and having these things work well and having them be competitive, not too expensive for the government to engage in procurement, encouraging efficient resource allocation. This is really quite an important matter of public policy. And the theory we've been working on is not just abstract theory, it's theory that helps us design these markets better. Now, some of this stuff, many of you probably think of auctions and market design as being about transactions involving money. Actually, there are many more. And let's see if I can get this thing. It's not moving. There we go. Well, let me, given the limited time, how much time do I have, by the way? Okay. All right. So one of the things I wanted to just tell you generally about auction design is that the way you design auctions depends on the goals, the context, the constraints. All of those things affect design and need to affect design. When I've been involved in auctions, sometimes the goal of sellers is just to maximize the revenue they obtain for something they're buying, or of people who are procuring might be to minimize cost, although actually procurement tends to be more complicated. You care about cost and also quality and also timing, so all of those things can matter. In government-run auctions, for example, in radio spectrum and other sectors that we'll talk about, one of the goals of government might be to reduce industry concentration, and that can affect auction design, and that you can try to design auctions to promote entry, and that becomes an important element of the design. Sometimes we're trying to protect small enterprises, and those attributes come into the design as well. So one of the first things you need to know when you're designing is what the goals are. And I want to comment with respect to these Spanish auctions that you can't just evaluate them by looking at revenues or costs. You need to know what the goals of the designers were and evaluate them with their performance with respect to those goals. Context, how many bidders in the Spanish spectrum auctions that took place recently? We had very small numbers of bidders, and so issues of coordination among the bidders become a central feature of the design. How many items are being sold and how are they related to one another? One of the things that makes achieving efficient allocations difficult is that in some of these contexts, the bidders need to acquire very specific combinations. For example, in radio spectrum, if you are acquiring a certain total quantity of radio spectrum, it's better if that spectrum is all contiguous, located next to each other. Or if you're acquiring a spectrum that are covering different geographic areas, you might want to acquire exactly the same frequencies in adjacent areas to make it easier when somebody is moving with their phone from one area to the next, that they don't have to switch frequencies in order to keep contiguous service. How much time is available to run the auction? Does it have to be quick? How long? Well, issues of timing there are many different ones. There can be constraints that affect things. I'm going to show you one example of some very complicated constraints. Physical constraints on what is possible to do, what's possible to buy or to sell. The market shares, if you care about industry concentration. The facts about it sometimes even in procurement auctions, when you're trying to keep costs low, you as a company might decide that it's important not to rely on a single supplier. You might not want to rely for reasons of natural disaster. You might want geographic dispersion of your sources of supply, or you might not want to be too reliant on a single supplier. You might want to make sure that no supplier has too large a share of your total procurement. The budget that you have available is often a constraint, of course, and the bidders that are able to participate and whether they're allowed to enter. All of these kinds of things affect us when we're doing real auction design. And finally, there are many different options. In designing an auction, auctions can be sealed bid auctions, or they can take place in a series of rounds. They can be combinatorial, where bidders are bidding. They can bid for individual items, or they might be able to bid for combinations of items when the relevant values are based on combinations. We can have bid scoring, where suppliers with different quality reputations or who are able to deliver at different times we have to somehow or another combine the different aspects of their offers to decide what it is we're comparing. And finally, the pricing rule. Those of you who've studied a little auction theory will have seen a lot of emphasis on first price versus second price auctions. First price, in which if you win and you're a buyer, you pay your bid, or second price auctions, and if you win and you're a buyer, you pay the next highest bid. There are advantages and disadvantages of each of those rules, and we have to evaluate it in the context for the bidders, given the constraints that are available and given the goals that we're trying to achieve. Now, all of that's kind of abstract, and the answer that it depends is not a very satisfying answer. I did want you to understand the complexity of the problem, but I want to tell you more than just it depends. And so I want to take you through a series of designs of things that people have actually done, and let's see how these auctions or how these markets have been designed. And the ones I'm going to talk to you about are ones where there have been innovations in the last couple of decades. And I'm going to start with two that don't involve money at all, just to connect market design for you with markets are about transactions, about resource allocation, about getting the right resources into the right hands, and not just about exchanges of money. So the two I'll start with are one about food banks, which is about charitable food distribution. It'll be an example from the United States where there's a central organization called Feeding America, which receives food donations. It allocates those donations to regional centers, which allocates them to the local food banks. And the food banks also receive local donations, and they have different needs. And the center doesn't really know what those needs are, and getting the right resources to the right locations is a resource allocation problem. But these food banks don't have any money. They're feeding poor people who can't pay. And these are gifts that are being distributed. And how do we do that effectively? I'll tell you a little bit about what was done. Kidney exchange. My colleague Al Roth has done a lot of work on this. It's about people who are sick from kidney disease and are seeking kidney transplants. Most of you can live with just one kidney, perfectly fine lives. So people donate kidneys to loved ones who are sick and need a kidney. But you'll see sometimes the loved one that you have is not the best donor for you. Somebody else would make the best donor, and there can be exchanges possible. And I'll show you how those work. And these are all exchanges, these first two categories, that don't involve money. Ride sharing we'll talk about, ride sharing we'll talk about only briefly, but Uber and Lyft have innovations in the way they do their pricing, and some of that actually relates. These do involve money, but I'll draw a connection for you between that and kidney exchange and how some of the principles that apply with money and without money are really just the same. We'll talk about cap and trade. The particular cap and trade I'll talk to you about is fisheries. That's one I've been involved in, where the goal is to avoid overfishing. So caps are put on the amount of fishing that's allowed, and then getting the right fishing licenses into the right hands. And if you're reducing the total size of catch, which is what was going on, you're going to have some exit from the industry. Doing that efficiently and subsidizing it to minimize impact, all of that's involved in designing a market that does involve a monetary exchange. We'll talk a little bit about radio spectrum. And if there's still time, I'll tell you about some of the innovations that have been made in search advertising and some of the work that's going on now in redesigning how financial markets work. Lots of work is going on in market design. It's really very exciting, and these are all real applications. I hope that will help inspire the students in the audience. Okay, so let's start with food banks. Again, I've already introduced the subject of food banks to you. We have poor people who are receiving food donations from local food banks. And this is the Feeding America is the name of one of the, basically the largest national organization that receives food donations and distributes them to local food banks. And this fellow over here is Canis Prendergast, who's an economist at the University of Chicago that helped them redesign their system by going to a market system. Now, before Canis helped them, they had a problem that their central governing board decided on the need of the local food bank, and it gave a certain number of points to each local food bank and said, this Chicago should be getting 5% of our total food donations, and then they would decide which 5% to send to Chicago. And they would often do this poorly. So the headline of this particular article is "Sending Potatoes to Idaho," which is something that happened. Idaho, for those of you who know the United States, will know grows more potatoes than anywhere else. They had plenty of local potato donations. They didn't need potatoes, but Feeding America Center didn't know that and sent potatoes to Idaho, which is really a silly thing to do. And you really need, if you're going to get resources allocated well, to use local information. You need the people in Idaho to tell you what they need, and the people in Alaska to tell you what they need, and the people in Florida, and so on, so that you can coordinate, send donations according to what they need, rather than according to just the beliefs of some central organization. So this, by the way, is a picture. There are 210 major food distribution centers in the United States. This is the one for the Greater Chicago area, the Greater Chicago Food Depository. Deciding what to send where is a complicated problem. Can you actually see from that corner over there? Oh, good. Okay. So this is what Canis talked them into doing, and what they do now, and they did set this up, I think, about 15 years ago. What they do now is instead of sending food to different food banks, they take those points, they call them shares, and they allocate to each food bank some number of shares. And then when new donations come along, they have a bidding system. So over here on some particular day, this is their Feeding America's Choice system. There's one of the lots that was available was a load of Gold Peacock Minute Maid beverage, and it weighs 27,000 pounds, and it's available in Waco, Texas, and you can bid for that. And you can see here's some dairy, here's Yoplait, and here's some empty banana boxes. I don't know why people want that, but anyway, there's a variety of things here. And this particular bidder has available about 60,000 shares that it can use for bidding, and it's also allowed to borrow up to 57,000 shares on this day if it wishes to use some of its shares ahead. And it can then make bids for the available for the available food supplies. And that way local people can decide what they need and ask for what they need rather than for what the central organization thinks they ought to have. And I'll show you in a moment how much, some indicator of how much better this is than the system that existed before. But you'll notice that these, one of the things I want you to notice before I go to the next page is that these things are coming from all over the place. So here's stuff that's coming from Waco, Texas. If you buy that, you've got to somehow ship it to where you are. Here's some stuff coming from the East Coast, from Mount Crawford, Virginia, and from the Midwest, Chicago, Illinois, and from the West Coast, Portland, Oregon. So one of the things you want to do is, you want to keep in mind shipping costs, which, again, the central organization tried to do, but we have a greater sensitivity by the people who are buying for themselves. And so here are what the consequences were of the change. This is just to show you that this was a really valuable change to make. The system went live in July 2005, and Canis, who helped them organize it, collected data from the auctions for the next 6 years, where there were 60,000 auctions over that period. And he compared that by going back to the 5 years before for food shipments through 2000 to see how things had changed as a result of putting the system in place. And here are the major changes that he observed. First of all, the mean load distance changed from about over 1,000 miles, from 1,075 miles to 646 miles. That is when the food banks were deciding for themselves which loads to take. They wanted things that were closer, so they could save on shipping costs. And they saved a significant amount on shipping costs in that way. About $17 million a year, 2006 dollars, were saved as a result just of the location of where things were coming from. I'd rather wait for tomorrow than take something from Waco, Texas today. If I'm up in Colorado, it's too far to ship. Okay, but I can save my, but I didn't tell you, by the way, what happens to these bids. If I bid 10,000 shares and win a load, what happens is that evening, all the winnings are redistributed back to the food banks in proportion to their priorities. So if you had a 5% priority in Chicago, all the money all the shares that are spent, 5% of those go into the budget of Chicago for the next day. And in that way, you can save and spend shares over time. And Chicago will end up spending about 5% of the total spend in these auctions. Okay, and another change that happened is that smaller food banks, it turned out, were less concerned about the quality of the food and more concerned about the quantity. By weight, the smaller food banks found themselves, these are food banks that are less than the median, bought about 72% more food than they were getting before. They were buying food that was slightly lower in quality, but they bought cheaper stuff rather than trying to buy just a random selection of what was being offered. And another thing that happened is that before, when Feeding America had donations to allocate, sometimes I would say, I have something to send to Yago over here, and Yago had said, it's just too expensive to ship it. It's not very valuable to me. He would reject donations. Well, we stopped getting rejected donations in this system, and because people were only bidding for what they want, and almost everything that was there got some bids, and the result is that there was more and better supply. Well, this is a correlation. We can't prove causation here, but immediately following this change, the donors started, who were not having so many of their donations rejected, started making more donations and better donations. That is, things that it was just, they could figure out what was actually needed. They could see the prices and see, gee, what people actually need are these fresh grains. I guess I'll donate those. And we got more and better donations in this system. So this was a big improvement. Okay. Let's see how I'm doing on time. I'll talk for a few moments about kidney exchange. Here's another market that does not involve money. In this one, these are data from about 2 weeks ago. I was on the web searching this stuff up. In the United States, there's about 90,000 patients that are waiting for a kidney transplant. And dialysis, the people who are suffering renal disease, kidney disease, and are getting dialysis, that's really expensive. In fact, it's the biggest single line item in the Medicare budget, and it counts for 1.2% of the entire U.S. budget, federal budget, is spent on dialysis expenses. So this is something that's costly in both lives and treasure. And in 2018, there were about 10,000 people who died or became too sick to transplant who are waiting for kidneys. So people are dying for lack of kidneys that to be transplanted in them, and it's costing a lot of money to maintain them in that position. And this continues to be a problem. You can see that that new patients, well, this only runs up through 2017, but new patients are running between 35 and 40,000 new patients a year that are going on the waiting list for kidneys, and many of them are dying. And there's only about 20,000 new kidneys a year that are becoming available. So the problem is not getting better, it's getting worse. All right, now there has been some kidney exchange for a long time. This has become much more systematic now that some design has been done. But here's the basic idea. You have a patient here, a male patient here and a female patient here, and this patient happens to have a donor who has been tested, and it says, I'm willing to donate a kidney to help keep my friend or spouse or child or mother alive. And they go in and they have a test done, a blood type test, tissue type test, and they say, sorry, your kidney's incompatible. This donation isn't going to work. And meanwhile, there's somebody else down here, another donor and patient, and they're also incompatible. But it might be that that this donor is compatible with that patient, and this donor is compatible with that patient, and if this couple could get together, you could save 2 lives. Now, before around 2000, this kind of exchange, one of the things that made this kind of exchange so hard is that there was no database, which is to say, this donor might come along and this patient might need a kidney, but there was no way to know that there was no database that said, here's a patient that that has a particular blood type and tissue type, and here's a donor of a particular blood type and tissue type, and they're compatible. There was no way to make the match because the information wasn't available. And by the way, there's a long history of this in market design. Land transactions back in the old days, when the data isn't good enough, you can't find a good match. And so part of the problem was just setting up a database and then deciding which matches should take place. Now, of course, it's also possible, I've shown you a simple 2-way match, but, one of the reasons that this gets complicated is you could have multi-way matches. You could have here where the compatibility, I've shown you an example with 3, and of course it doesn't stop there, but you can imagine why setting up this exchange involves some complexity. Now, one of the things that's brand new that's going on now, that hasn't been fully implemented yet, but I think is extremely promising, is the idea of dynamic matching. And here the notion is that instead of finding somebody, I have a loved one to whom I wish to donate a kidney, she needs a kidney, instead of looking just for people who are around today, we find somebody else who can use the kidney that I'm willing to donate, and we can create a priority for my loved one for the next kidney that comes by tomorrow. This is dynamic matching. And I have an example of this. I was going to create a slide for this, but there's an example of this on the Uber website for matching cars to riders. And because it's a general principle, I thought maybe I would just show you what Uber has on their website. And it goes like this. Uber says that in the early days of matching drivers to cars, a rider was immediately matched with the closest available driver. So they have this animated. I couldn't copy their animated thing, unfortunately, but what would happen is this guy arrived first, and there was a car over here, so they assigned this driver to come pick up that rider. And shortly afterwards, 15 seconds later, individual number 2 arrived, and this car, which was then the closest available car, drove to pick up individual number 2. Now, if they had just waited 15 or 30 seconds, what might have happened is they would have said, gee, actually, and now for those of you who've used these apps, you'll know that you wait longer at the beginning now because they routinely wait a little bit. They said, gee, we could have assigned this car to this driver and this car, this car to this rider. And here the total wait time is 8 minutes. There the total wait time is 11 minutes. 30 seconds of waiting could have saved 3 minutes. 30 seconds of waiting to make the allocation could have saved 3 minutes of wait time for the riders. So making the allocation dynamically, that is taking account of waiting before you make some of the decisions, can lead to tremendous benefits. In the kidney exchange, here is an example. This is an unusual example, but it makes the point kind of clearly. This is from 2009. So here we have Matt Jones, who was a donor who donated a patient, Barbara Bonnell, whose husband, Ron, then donated a kidney to Angela Beckham, whose daughter then donated a patient to this woman, and so on down the line. And we were able, through for dynamic kidney exchange, to save a whole lot of lives by donating a kidney and then having the person whose donor gave a kidney receive a priority. And systematic ways of doing this, or algorithms for doing this, are now being developed, and they're, in theory, incredibly effective. I won't provide the whole theory for you here, but we could save a lot more lives if we made this done in a systematic way. Okay. Oops, there we go. Well, okay. Cap and trade. Most of you think about cap and trade for carbon. I'm going to talk about cap and trade for fisheries because this is something that I've been involved with personally. So here, the particular one I'll start with was a cap and trade in New South Wales, Australia. A colleague of mine helped do this design in 2016. Australia had a problem of overfishing off the coast of New South Wales, and they needed to reduce the catch, and they did that by reducing the amount of fish you could catch from each individual license. And if you're catching less fish, we needed to reduce the size of the fishing industry. So what happened, there were about 1,000 commercial fishers, and one of the things that made this complicated is there were 100 different kinds of licenses. That is, each fishing license is a license to catch some number of fish in some geographic area. The licenses differed by the species that you could catch and the area that you were allowed to catch in, and there were 100 different categories. And some of these boats are going out of business, and other boats are finding that their catch rights are reduced, and they need to acquire additional rights to stay in business. And the government wanted to subsidize the whole process. They used what I'll call a double price process. The government provided a subsidy and calculated prices. And this, I'm not going to go into the details of this design because it's actually pretty complicated, but they found prices to offer for licenses that the buyers had to pay, and prices that they offered to fishing boats to sell their entire collection of their entire catch, all the licenses they had, so they could exit and go out of business. This is what for those of you who've studied some economics, this is not just marginal decisions, these are inframarginal, these are extensive decisions. You decide to, if you're selling, you don't want to just sell one more license, you want to sell your whole bundle of licenses because you're exiting. You already have too few licenses to keep to make it economical to keep your boat in operation. So these chunks are what make the market design a bit more complicated. Now, is that going to work? Here we go. So Chile is looking at or redesigning its fishing processes now. I was involved in this earlier this late summer and early fall. Chile has a long coastline. It's 4,000 miles. You know your geography. Chile has a long coastline, and they have multiple fishing areas along the coastline and multiple species. And the regulator sets a cap on the amount that can be caught of different species in different areas. And my company, Optionomics, made a proposal to the Chilean Senate about what the new law will be. And we suggested that fishing licenses, well, one of the problems that they have is people are catching fish and then throwing dead fish out because fish don't swim only in one species. Sometimes there are accompanying species. Sometimes there are certain fish that you catch, and you can't help but catch the accompanying species that swim with them. And so we suggested that the licenses be structured so that species and accompanying species be sold together. The we suggested that bids would allow downward sloping demand curves so that bidders could specify what they want at different prices, and that they could substitute among species or among areas, saying, I can fill my fishing boat over here, or I can fill it over there. Where I am on the coast, I can fish in any of these 3 different areas, or I can catch either of these 2 different species. And so we wanted to allow them to make bids that expressed that, and that's novel, by the way. I'll show you more detail in a moment. They wanted to make some changes to market power. They wanted to limit the amount of catch by the largest of there are a few large families that control most of the catch in Chile, and they wanted to limit market concentration. And we proposed that they build that into the bidding that is done, and that they set auction prices to clear the market, to equate supply and demand. So let me show you a little bit more detail about that. This is how the Chilean auction, at least they didn't actually run very many auctions, but this is how they worked in principle. The boxes in gray are boxes that a bidder would fill in. And what you do is you have an area in a species, I'm going to call that A1, and this bidder is bidding for 5 units of this product and offering a particular price, $220, and is also making another bid for 2 more units at a price of $150 a unit, and is also bidding for species, for product A2, again, a location in a species, for a price of 7 units for a price of $200. And those gray boxes are filled in by the bidders. I've done a little calculation on the side for you here of what total price that means that are being offered. And again, these 2 bids are both for product A1. They can both be winning, or it could be that just the higher price bid is winning and the lower price bid is losing. But that's what a bid looked like. And then the highest bid for each product win, and bidders pay the price that they have bid. So that was the old auction design. And but it creates a problem for bidders. This kind of auction, and there are lots of auctions like this around the world, by the way. This is not unusual in Chile. It's really a bad design. And what makes it bad is that bidders have to guess. So it might be that, you lose the auction here, and you discover the price was too high for product A1, but you would have been happy to take product A2 instead, which had a low price, but you didn't know which one to bid for, and you didn't want to win both. So you guess what to bid for, and you guess how many to bid for. It might be that at a low price, you would have bid for more. You have a downward sloping demand curve, but you have no idea what the price is going to be because it's an auction. So bidders have a hard time knowing how to bid, and it's complicated. This is an auction that's complicated to bid in, even though this is almost a worldwide standard for how these kinds of auctions are run. So we had proposed something a little different. This is the same products that this bidder is bidding for, and I put in the same bids for maximum units and maximum price and so on. But now there are 4 more gray boxes here. And these 4 more gray boxes are going to be used to express substitution, as you'll see. So for example, you get to put in a weight on each per unit in each of these. It might be, for example, that what you're trying to do is fill a boat, and you can carry a certain amount of biomass, measured in kilograms, for example, and maybe, or you have some other basis of substitution. So here, the first 2 rows, by the way, show a downward sloping demand curve. This basically means that at a price of under 220, I would buy 5 units, and at a price of under 150, I'd buy 2 additional units. So you can encode a downward sloping demand curve that way. And here, if the weights for product A1 and A2 are 200 and 300 respectively, maybe those are kilograms of biomass per unit, then, and I say, gee, and I don't want more than 2,500 units. So this kind of bid allows the bidder to express substitution, to say, I'm trying to buy 2,500 units. I'll take whatever is the best deal for me, I can take product A1 or product A2, and notice the calculations here show that the total bid here is for a grand total of 3,500 units. But I don't want to win all of those, and my bid is understood to be a bid for only 2,500 units, weighted units, expressed in this way. And this expresses a demand curve with substitution, and it's pretty easy for bidders to do. And the auction determines a set of market clearing prices. From these, the bidders end up being assigned at the market clearing prices, whatever combination is the best deal for them. So this is understood that if the price here was 120, for example, this would be understood to be a profit of 100 per unit and a profit of 30 per unit here. And the profit on here would depend on the price of product A2, and people would be buying whatever is the best deal for them. And this is an easy calculation to do. Our report to Chile showed them how to do it. And this much reduces the need to guess. You don't need to know which product is going to be the cheapest. You don't need to guess how high to bid depending on where you think the market clearing price is going to be. The need to guess favors the large companies, which first of all have bigger impact on prices and also have more analysts available. This says, here's the maximum price I'm willing to pay. Get me the best deal you can. And it makes bidding quite a bit easier and improves the efficiency of the resource allocation. That was a proposal we made to Chile earlier this year. Okay, let me take a few minutes to talk about radio spectrum. This is my own area of biggest successes. The design that we proposed, that Bob Wilson and I proposed to the Federal Communications Commission in the U.S. in 1993 and was implemented in 1994, became a worldwide standard. And then some combinatorial auctions that we devised later became another worldwide standard. And so these things have been used for hundreds of billions of dollars of transactions in radio spectrum. The most recent auction in the U.S. this year in early 2021 was $85 billion just by itself. So we've had some really big auctions that have used the rules we've designed. But the one I'm going to talk to you about is, and this is from U.S. and Canada and the U.K. this year. And I want to mention this one to you to show you how context matters, that the way you design an auction depends on how competitive it is. So what we have here are two auctions. In both of them, this is so-called mid-band spectrum. It's the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band, which the only thing you need to know about it is that it's essentially the same band that the UK and US are selling, essentially the same thing. These frequencies are close enough, 3.6 to 3.8 and 3.7 to 4.2, that technologically they have the same uses. Okay, that the only reason you don't need to know anything more about the spectrum than that from this part. Both of them used very similar rules. They were simultaneous multiple round clock auctions with an assignment stage, with slight differences in the rules, which I won't go over, but they used essentially the same rules, but they got drastically different outcomes. And in the US, which was very competitive, it was 81 billion, I said 85 earlier. This total price was $81 billion. It was $1.10 per megahertz pop. So what's a megahertz pop? Okay, so the way we measure quantities of radio spectrum for various comparisons is that the value of a license depends on how many people it covers, measured in pops, that's population, and on how much bandwidth we're providing, that's megahertz. Okay, so if you're buying a license, we multiply the number of people that you're able to cover with your license by the bandwidth that you have available for them to measure a quantity of spectrum. And that gives us something that we can use for international comparisons. So in the US, the price in US dollars was about $1.10 per unit, per megahertz pop. And in the UK, it was 9 cents. And these auctions were February and March this year. So we're talking about same time, roughly the same needs, drastically different prices. Okay? Now, in the US, again, this was very competitive, and I could delve into the reasons for that. In the UK, it's not very competitive. Spain's auctions this year were not very competitive. So what happened in the UK was this. In the first round of the auction, where the government quoted a price of 20 million pounds per lot, the total demand that was expressed by the three interested bidders, which were EE, Telefonica, and Vodafone, was for a total of 48 licenses. There was a supply of 24 licenses, plenty of excess demand. But by round 3, each of these guys had reduced their demand to just 8 units. Total demand is 24, supply is 24, the auction was over. Just took 3 rounds for them to drop their total demand by half and say, we'll just split the market. Each of us is getting 8 licenses and a third of the spectrum. And they didn't need to know what the others were doing. The UK didn't tell anybody what the other bidders were doing, but they figured out among themselves easily enough that they could get this thing settled for a low price by just bidding for a third, and they knew what the total excess demand was, and they were able to infer how to bid. So that's why they got low prices. They got effectively cooperation among what the bidders would call cooperation, what some might call collusion, among the bidders establishing a low price. In the US, on the other hand, the auction was quite competitive. You need to know something about the context to design an auction well. Okay, now the auction that I consider my personal biggest success in my career is the broadcast incentive auction in the US in 2016. And this was easily the most complicated resource allocation in history that has ever used an auction. And I'm going to describe to you what made it so complicated and what we did. Okay, so this is, we are trying to buy television broadcast rights from television broadcasters, mostly from small television broadcasters. We're to reassign the remaining broadcasters into a smaller set of channels, to take that set of channels which no longer have broadcasters and create mobile broadband rights and sell that to the mobile broadband companies. And all of that, just the two-sided nature is complicated, but I'm going to focus on the complication of buying just buying the television broadcast rights, which was even the hardest part of the whole problem. So this is an example of what the television broadcast area looks like. This is an actual graph of a little piece in the northeastern United States. The red dot in the middle represents the physical location of a television broadcast station. And each of the other dots, these are called nodes in the graph, each other node is the physical location of a television broadcast station. And for those of you who know little graph theory, we have nodes and edges. Each edge in this graph, which is a line connecting two nodes, represents a pair of stations that if they were both assigned the same broadcast channel, they'd create interference. It wouldn't work. Okay? So some of their viewers would be unable to see their signal. So there are basically two stations which are too close and don't have a mountain range in between them, can't be assigned the same broadcast channel without creating interference. So this is what this looked like. Each node represents the location of a television station. Each edge represents a pair that can't both be assigned to the same channel. And nodes connected to the central node are shown in salmon color here, and then the white nodes are connected to the salmon nodes, and out you go throughout the country. The whole graph for the United States and Canada, which was coordinating with the United States, looks like this. Very dense east of the Mississippi, pretty dense also in California and the Northwest. And the problem is to choose a set of stations to continue to broadcast, to maximize the total value of the stations that remain on the air, and to fit them into a smaller set of broadcast channels. Now, we got too many stations at first, so what we want to do is we want to buy some of these stations and to reduce the number of stations so we can fit them into, we bought about 150 out of the 2,000 or 2,300 television stations, to reduce them and then pack them more efficiently into the remaining channels. Now, one question you might ask is, okay, given a set of offers, which ones can we accept? When is it possible to take a set of stations and fit them into a given set of channels? And what makes this hard is there's about 130,000 co-channel, what I'm showing you here are called co-channel constraints, meaning two stations that can't be on the same channel. There's about 130,000 of these co-channel constraints in this problem. And if you give me a set of stations and say, if you accept these bids, buy these stations, is it possible to fit the remaining stations on the, with the channels we have? This is a famous problem in computer science called the graph coloring problem. The famous problem says, given a graph, nodes and edges, and a set of colors, is it possible to assign a color to each node so that no two connected nodes are the same color? Well, here, is it possible to assign a channel to each station so that no two connected stations are on the same channel? It's the same problem. And it's a problem that is known to be NP-complete. And those of you who have studied a little complexity theory in computer science know that that means that this is a hard problem, so hard that there are no algorithms that exist that can guarantee to find the solution in, I'll just say, what we'll call a reasonable amount of time. If you've studied computer science, you know what I mean by that. But it means that, essentially in a lifetime, you can't guarantee that there's no algorithms that will guarantee to solve this problem all the time. Okay? So that made this kind of a hard problem. We can't even tell with the set of we can't always tell with a set of stations whether it's even possible to assign channels to stations. So what we did is we created we created some new algorithms, which I won't talk to you about. Computer scientists on the team did brilliant work on this. And we created some new algorithms. And from a bidder's perspective, it looks like this. You're sitting there and you've done some analysis. You figure out that your station is your local TV station in Tulsa, Oklahoma is worth, $10 million to you. And the government opens the auction, says the opening offer for your station is $25 million. And you have only one decision to make. You can say yes or no. So I say $25 million. You have a station that you think is worth $10 million. If you say no, you can keep your station and continue to broadcast. If you say yes, I might buy your station for $25 million. Or maybe what will happen is I'll say, well, I got more yeses, more offers than I need. So how about $24 million? And I go around the next round and offer a lower price until I don't have more stations than I need. And then I say, fine, at $24 million, I just barely have enough stations. I'm buying your station for $24 million. So the price offered may be reduced in the next round. And when the auction ends, the sellers receive their final offered prices. Now, this is an auction that's really easy for bidders. If you, no complicated decision to make. If your station's worth $10 million and I offer you 25, you'd be a fool to do anything but say yes. You say no, you keep your station. You say yes, if things work out badly, you'll still keep your station. If they work out well, you'll sell your station for $25 million. Obviously, that's better. You don't need to know anything about how I'm doing the calculation. You don't need to know anything about what the other bidders are doing. It's just obviously best for you to say yes when I offer you a value higher than your station value. And it's obvious that you should say no when I offer you a value less than your station value. Very simple for bidders to participate in this auction. The auctions differ by the rules that are used to set prices and to decide when we're done. And what we did is, so this is a big class of auctions. Any rules that you make to set prices and determine ending give you a different descending clock auction. So it's a big class. And we showed that all of these can be smoothly adapted to limited computation capacity. If we go through and try to calculate go through one of these calculations and the computer says, sorry, I ran out of time, we can say, okay, we're just not going to lower the price in that case, and we'll do everything else just the way we were going to do it. And in this way, whatever our computation capacity is and however fast our algorithm is, we can always adapt to a limited computation capacity. We can adapt to budget constraints. We weren't allowed to spend more than the prices we were being offered for the broadcast license, for the mobile broadband licenses. And we can adapt to that by, if these are too expensive, we just continue to lower the price and take a risk that we won't be able to clear as much spectrum, and that actually happened in the auction. They're all obviously strategy. You don't have to trust the auctioneer to know how to bid. How to bid is completely straightforward. This is technically what we call obvious strategy proofness. We could pick these rules to try to reduce the cost of acquisition, and it has a number of other nice properties that I won't have time to go over here. We proved theorems in our theory paper about these being properties of the auction. And what happened when the FCC ran it, we actually, what happened is we spent about $10 billion to acquire spectrum. But to see how this would perform, what we did is we ran some simulations. The calculations are too hard to do on the whole country. If we wanted to compare this to what we could do if we would optimize, we couldn't optimize. So we picked an area 200 miles around New York City where effectively we could opt. It was a small enough problem we could just barely do that with optimization. And here's what this area looked like in terms of its interference constraints. It was just barely small enough. And we simulated. And I guess I'd probably end on this slide here. The computation time, if you used optimization and ran a Vickrey auction, this would have taken, our simulations took an average of 90 CPU days using the CPUs that were available at the time. And our auction could be calculated about 1,000 times faster in 1.5 CPU hours. So it was a lot faster because we had much simpler rules. The value of the stations taken off the air, if you did it optimally, set that index to be 100. The stations we took off the air were about 5% more valuable. So we had some additional welfare loss from our failure to optimize. But because we'd set the rules to keep prices low, the cost was about 25% less than a Vickrey auction's cost. So we figure we saved the taxpayer on the order of $2.5–3 billion in the acquisition by running the auction this way. Okay, so this was and this was widely hailed. The bidders loved it. They found it easy. The thing ran smoothly, and it was widely hailed as a success. I consider it, for me, the most complicated auction, and quite a success to have done that. All right, I'm not going to have time to run over for you. There's been innovations when you use Google every time you type in something in a Google search page, they post ads, and those ads are determined by instantaneous auctions that are run in an automated way. Similarly, for internet search, I just search for bicycle pumps, and I have bicycles advertised to me on my when I visit CNN. Financial markets, I've been talking to the New York Stock Exchange about their opening and closing auctions, and there are some ideas about smart markets. But I think I'm pretty much used up my time. So let's bring it to a close. Thank you very much.
Let me say a few words to finish this session. Dear authorities, Dean of the Faculty of our Faculty of Business and Economical Sciences, people from your team, thank you very much. This is the rector. dear General Director for Universities in our region in Andalucía, querido Juanjo, gracias por estar aquí. Dear President of the Authority of the Harbour of Sevilla, Rafa, muchísimas gracias también por estar aquí. Rest of people of this faculty, Dean of the Faculty of Physics, researchers, teachers, students, and ladies and gentlemen. Dear Paul, thank you very much for your excellent lectures that, in my opinion, has demonstrated in a very clear manner the universal meaning of the word university. You are coming from a very far country, and you have used the same ideas and the same rules that the science has in all the spaces where the university is. Thank you very much. And today, this academic year, is a very important moment in our university, and we have two reasons for doing that. First of all, because the half century of life of our faculty is a very good opportunity to celebrate, dear Dean. As I told you before, Paul, we are a very old university. We have a very long history. We are now, if I am not wrong, 516 years old. In all this very large period of life, we have been growing up throughout all the city, and now we have 25 centers giving universities studies and teaching in all the city. But now, this moment in our 50th century of our faculty is a very good moment, not only for celebrating, but also to rethink who we are, where we are, and the most important thing, what we can do for the future. We are living here, Paul, very crucial moments. In one part, and not only because of the consequences of the terrible pandemic time, but at the same time, this is happening at the moment, we have very uncertainties in our region. We are thinking in a new financial space for our universities. At national level, we are now considering the possibility to have a new law for universities for all the nations. So this is very important for us. And at the same time, we are now working in Europe, in all the Europe, thinking in developing an agenda, crucial agenda to transform our university space looking at 2030. So all these things is happening at the same when we are celebrating our half century of life. I think that we should use this celebration like an excuse to to call many people like you, Paul, to talk about the different sciences, the different part of the knowledge of the human being, to see what we should do for the future. For all of this, I think that your presence here is very important, very particularly important for us to both celebrate and think. So thank you very much. And I would like to finish with saying two wishes. The first one is directed to Paul directly. Paul, I hope, and I think all of us hope, that you have enjoyed in Sevilla with your wife and with your two friends here. And the second one, that is much more important for us, for people from our university, I like and I hope, and all of us, I think we hope, that you can visit once more our university. Paul told me, this is surprising, but I should confess it to everybody, Paul told me that he has been several times, not one, not two, not three, several times in Spain, and he has visited Madrid, Barcelona, Malaga, many other places, and he had never been in Sevilla. So I hope that this stage changed your vision about our nation, and you come back here, and I would like, and I invite you formally to come again and to collaborate with us in some of our courses, different things we have to work together. And this will be the very nice present for all of us in this celebration of the 50th anniversary. So, like we are waiting for the possibility to have a present from you coming back again. Let me know that I give you 2 presents that the Dean has prepared for you. First of all, I have many things here. It's special. This is 50, this is clear now. Yeah. Oh, you see it?
Manuel Rey.
Ahora.